Hey, this is Dominic, and this is your home for the cutting-edge conversations on optimizing your personal performance, lighting up your sex life, and living a purpose-driven life of your own design.
These are the topics that Dominic and I have both struggled with in our own lives and still don't always get right. This is Brian. Welcome to the Great Man Podcast.
There comes a time in a man's life, usually at 1:30 a.m. on a Sunday night when you're trying to sleep, when you start to ask deeper questions about your life, such as, who am I? What the hell am I doing with my life? And how many more streaming services do I need before I feel complete? These are big questions. Well, at least the first two were, and they can be nearly impossible to navigate on your own. You see, the quality of your life often depends on the quality of questions you ask. And that's particularly true of the quality of questions you ask as you inspect your own life. As we've already entered the final 90 days of 2021, if you can believe that, you may find yourself starting to ask deeper questions about how you showed up this year. And was it any different than the year before? You may start to ask deeper questions around how you want to finish this year and how you want to start 2022. So to help you do that, the final 13 episodes of 2021 on the Great Man Within podcast are all organized and tightly focused around one central theme: stepping into your great man in 2022. That means we're going to be honing in on topics like how to design the next year of your life, which has become an annual tradition on the show, how to design the optimal day, how to execute on the complex and meaningful changes in your life, the books you need to read in 2022, how to build a life that feels adventurous, meaningful, and full of forward momentum. These are just a few of the themes and the topics that you can expect over the final 90 days of this year. And in addition to that, we're going to have a few community opportunities where I'm going to be running live events, live webinars, where you can come and work on that stuff so you can finish 2021 strong and you can come out of the gates in 2022 feeling confident about your vision for yourself in the year ahead. Now, this episode today kickstarts our 90-day march towards the finish line of 2021. And this episode is about the 5 questions that every man must ask about his life. And by the way, these questions have been sourced by the men in the Great Man Within community. So these 10 questions, actually, we've come up with 10. We're going to go through the first 5 today, have all come from the men in our masterminds, the men in our Facebook group. These are the ones that are the most pertinent to you. And so the big dog, Brian Stacy, and I are going to get you started with the first of these 5 questions. And the other 5 are linked in the show notes with an article that I wrote for you entitled 10 Questions Every Man Must Ask About the Quality of His Life. And this article, guys, I can't tell you the amount of praise this article has received from the men in the mastermind already. This article is a tremendous piece for you to share with the men in your life who are starting to ask different questions or maybe curious about some of this inner work stuff, but are hesitant or unsure or skeptical, about taking action, or don't want to listen to a podcast and take that investment of time. This article is written for that guy. It's written in plain English so the mainstream man can digest it. And again, that article is linked in the show notes. So without further ado, let's get into our conversation today. The first of 13 episodes in helping you to build your great man for 2022, starting with 5 questions you must ask about your life. All right, big man. I've actually got some really good news for our listeners. Okay. So our listeners, by their very nature, are actively working on improving themselves. And this past weekend, I released a post on my Instagram account that very quickly became by far my most liked, commented, engaged post of all time. It was a post that had very few words. It just said in big, bold letters at the top, "If you date men, know this: a man with lots of potential and a man actively seeking his full potential are 2 different men. Appreciate the first, invest in the second." And this one has over 1,200 likes right now. I don't think I've ever done a post that's had over like 500. The resulting comments were, you and I hear this all the time, particularly from women's groups. My guy's got so much potential. I can see it, but he just doesn't go after it. It's infuriating. It's frustrating. This post, I could tell you, there were plenty of women and men who date men who are just like, I know that feeling. And here's to the guys who are actively pursuing their best selves, because that is infinitely attractive.
Big cheers. And as you said, the question that we get oftentimes from people that date men are like, how do I get them involved? Right? How in the world do I get them involved? And we'll just tease this here, Dom, but you just showed me a little video that you just did about kind of introducing guys, if you will. And I know my journey here began with some questions that I asked myself. Some were sexual in nature, about kind of some of my behaviors and some fears. And I am pumped to jump in today to some of these. Like, I don't know what we're going to call these. We need to give these a title of some sort, but they're the questions that we need to be asking ourselves if we want to get on the side of just potential to working on it.
Yeah, I mean, we have a good buddy in common. His name is Jason Goldberg, and he calls questions like these jailbreak questions, right? And it's the questions to help you break free from the jail cell of your mind, because our minds are so limited. They're so boring, right? I mean, 90 to 95% of what we think about and worry about and ruminate about, same shit over and over and over again. You ask the right questions. It's almost like, kind of picking the lock from the inside, and the door opens. You can start to see the world in a different way. One of the things I think that you and I have recognized is, for men who have not yet stepped into this arena of inner work, but are kind of like, outside wondering whether they're going to scalp a ticket, is where they start to ask different questions about their life, right? They've been kind of cruising along, grinding along, doing the things, having some level of success. But then there's kind of this wake up call, whether it's in the middle of the night or, I don't know, maybe getting on like the 50th business trip of the year, or disappointing the spouse for not being around, or maybe making another empty paycheck. And it's just like, what is this all for, right? These questions start to arise. And so what we've done is we've actually put together an article, like a full, I think 3,000 or 4,000 words, answering 10 of the most important questions that any man can ask himself about his life. And we're going to start you with the first 5 here today. And I asked the big dog to pick his 5 favorite. So we're going to be going over Brian's 5 favorite today.
And by 5 favorite, you mean 5 most relevant. Oftentimes the questions I'm still asking myself. It's just a variation of what it was before. Yeah. So here we go.
Cool. So, all right, man. Question number 1 that you picked out. Are you always busy, yet you feel like time is slipping through your fingers?
Nobody can hear me right now because I'm just shaking my head here.
Can you feel Ryan's face?
Yes.
There's just that like smirk, like spreading across his face. Like, yep, been there way too many times in my life.
I'd prefer not to talk about it, but here we are. For me, Dominic, I didn't feel this until I think it was 2012 was the first time I ever felt this. And it was at one of my lowest points. I had just recovered from cancer. I had just not gotten the job that I've been planning to get for the 8 years prior to it. And I remember walking home after this event, asking myself the question that I'd never really asked myself before, which was like, what do I actually want? And at that moment, it felt like time was moving faster. I had all these like things that I was supposed to do that I'd been told by society, by my parents, by whoever, but I'd never really asked my question, like, what do I want and why do I want it? What is that? And so for this question, this is a really important question for me, because when I started asking that question, the first thing that happened to me is time felt like it was moving faster. Like all of a sudden I wasn't moving in flow with it. And now since then, that has ebbed and flowed. When I feel really on purpose, and we talked a lot about drift on this podcast, right? And being aware of it. I didn't know when I was drifting. And so asking this sort of question at least gets us to the point of like, well, am I drifting? Because this is a pretty good indicator. It's a pretty good symptom that things feel sped up if we're drifting.
Yeah. I mean, listen, man, I can totally relate to when I was in my 20s, time felt like an eternity. I felt like time would I would always have time. It never even crossed my mind on a weekend when I would spend, Saturday and Sunday hungover, eating chicken parm sandwiches, watching college football on Saturday, pro football on Sunday, doing nothing with my life. Like I would burn a decade's worth of weekends just like that. And I felt no remorse for it. Because the ignorance was bliss. And then one day I wake up and I'm like, people are getting married and people are getting promoted. I got promoted too, but it's like, now all of a sudden I'm starting to look around. I'm like, wait a minute. My parents are getting older. I see other people's parents dying. Like the time starts to really feel different. And then I would say for maybe some of our other listeners who are maybe in their 40s or 50s, who've accomplished a lot, who are accomplishing a lot, who are getting lots of things done, can also start to feel that sense of, I blink and the year is over. And last year felt the same way. And the year before that felt the same way. And my bank account looks healthy. And my family feels like, okay, my kids are getting older, but I feel like I didn't put an imprint on this year. I don't really know exactly where it is I'm going. Am I leaving a legacy? Is what I'm doing actually matter? Who cares? And that's where I think we start to wake up. And one of the terms that we put across here in this conversation is this term of lazy busy, right? Like, are you in this perpetual state of busyness, wishing it were different, and yet doing absolutely nothing to make it different, right? Like that's lazy. It's just indiscriminate action left unchecked over a long period of time. Because sometimes it can be easy just to wake up and get the laundry list of to-do things done. It's actually harder to say no, to stop, to change a job or to change a lifestyle, because that actually requires a different level of energy.
There's also a feeling of importance. When we're busy, I feel important because, hey, I don't have time for that. I can't fit in that meeting. Got too much to do. And so there's like some sort of reward, some sort of badge that we can wear about being busy that really is just a distraction.
So to that point, Elizabeth Gilbert, the author of Eat, Pray, Love and Big Magic, she has this great thing for perfectionism, which we're going to borrow here to talk about that, like that feeling of I'm important just by doing a lot of stuff. She says, let's just call perfectionism for what it is. Fear masquerading around in like a $2,000 suit. Like perfectionism is just fear masquerading in a very well-dressed suit. This feeling of importance by being perpetually busy, even when you're only just doing a bunch of small things, is also the illusion of importance, right? It's masquerading around in a $2,000 suit. And when you really peel back the layers of the onion, the thing that's fueling that perpetual state of busyness is fear of what happens when I stop? What happens if I have to do something different? What's the energy that's required from me if I'm going to change my habits or my work or my relationship? These kinds of things. There's a lot of fear in there. So this gets to the root of why time slips through our fingers.
I want to get your take on this, Tom. I was at a wedding this weekend. I was sitting outside in the morning. I grabbed some coffee. I was doing some work on my computer. And this older couple comes downstairs and they sit at the table with me as they're eating their breakfast. I overhear their conversation. They're talking about, this is the morning. They're part of the wedding. The wedding doesn't start until 5 p.m. And so I remember the husband saying, we've got about 7 hours to kill. And they were like trying to figure out what they wanted to do that day, walk through the park. And so I went through this entire emotional journey. The first one was, oh man, like the idea of killing 7 hours, like how inefficient is that? But more importantly, like, how do you not know what you want to do? And then I started reflecting on my own life and I was like, well, do I know what I want to do? Because right now I'm just working. And do I really need to be doing this right now? Or am I just doing this because I don't actually know what I want to do for the next 7 hours? Right. So it came back to me full circle. And then finally, the last place that my mind went was, but wouldn't that be kind of nice?
To have that time?
To have that
Sure.
time, to just be able to float and be able to. And to me, where I concluded was, yes, it would be, but only if it was intentional. For me, only if I was like, hey, this could be the 7 hours where I'm like, I'm totally chill. I don't have anything planned and that's okay.
Yes.
And so I was trying to find that balance between like, what is time slipping away or killing 7 hours versus like just having freedom and space to move.
Correct. Yeah, buddy, I think you nailed it with the word intentionality, right? Like when intentionality is brought to how you want to use your time. If it's 7 hours of intentional, I'm just going to meander through the day and see what life brings to me. If that's your intention, then you're living in alignment with that. That's not letting time slip away. That's not, quote, unproductive time. That's the best use of that time when you have intended to use it in that way. I'm going to use these 7 hours to be the most productive I've ever been in my life. Great. As long as you've made that choice consciously and then you align your energy around that. And I think what we're getting at with this question of, do you feel like time is slipping through your fingers? Or, even when you're busy, does it feel like time is slipping away? Is because there's some level of intentionality that's missing, right? We always talk about drift and intentionality are the two bipolar opposites. Intentionality is the antidote to drift. And so when you feel, even when you're doing a million things, that time's slipping through your fingers, it's a trigger for you to say, where am I being unintentional with my time? So to wrap this question, and we're going to do this with each of them, just for our listeners to answer on their own. On a scale of 1 to 10, how true is this statement? Are you always busy, yet you feel like time is slipping through your fingers? 1 being not at all, 10 being a bullseye. It's totally true. How true is that statement? And maybe even write that down for yourself. Question number 2, this is the one that you picked also, Bri. How big is the gap between your public self and your secret self? And I want to provide some context here before you jump in and weigh in here. How big is the gap between your public self and your secret self? Now, I'd like you to imagine that you have 3 separate lives: your public self, your private self, and your secret self. The public self is the image you allow most of the world to see, right? This is what you believe is going to get you accepted, approved, loved, what you think is appropriate for the world to see. The private self, there's a level of discernment around who gets to see what, right? There's certain boundaries. Maybe you let, your coworkers see certain things, but you let your close friends see all of you or more parts of you. Maybe you let your mom and dad see parts of you. You let your spouse see other parts of you. There's a private self that has some level of discernment around boundaries of who gets to see what. This third part of you, the secret self, is really born in shame. These are the parts of you that you feel need to be hidden because if they were revealed to your lover, to your coworkers, to your parents, to your friends, that you'd be ridiculed, that you'd be ostracized, that it would take their love away from you. You'd be unlovable if the world found this out. So there's a big distinction between even the private and the secret self, and that big distinction is shame. So this first question we asked is, how big of a gap is there between your public self and your secret self? What do you have to say about this, buddy?
Yeah, Dom, I'm glad that you made the distinction between what is private and what is secret. And I think sometimes I haven't done a good job of distinguishing those, but now it's crystal clear for me. When I'm feeling something, and this is true in my relationship, whether that's romantic or with business partners, when I'm feeling something that's really heavy, and I'm starting to feel that like, don't say that, don't do that. Like, I know that that's the shame / secret side of things. Yep. Whereas the private feels totally aligned. It feels like nobody deserves this. This is just me. It doesn't need to be in public, right? It doesn't do anybody any harm or any good if they did know it. So like, this is that line. And so for me, this is a huge indicator for where is my energy leaking? Where are those things that I'm trying to repress, that I'm trying to keep down from the world to see? And what do I want to do about it?
Yep.
How do I want to release this? And man, when I have done that in the past, and I give you an example, Dom. We've told this story before. First time that you saw me on a stage, I had a lot of fear around what I was going to say wrong.
Yeah.
Right. That fear then turned into like, oh my gosh, what have I said wrong in the past? And some shame associated with that. And so with that wasn't a secret thing, right? I wasn't keeping or a private thing, I should say. It wasn't private, but it was something that needed to be released.
Yeah.
And when I was able to do that on stage by saying, hey, like I may say something wrong here and I want to hear about it. I want to learn and I want to grow from that. That provided me all the freedom in the world.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really what we're talking about here is like, is who I am publicly aligned to who I really am privately?
Yeah. And let a former addict weigh in on this one. Cause I can tell you, The secret life is where I buried all of these parts of me that I felt were unlovable, that were dark, that were perverted. And, one of the things that I'd heard, I haven't read Teal Swan's book yet, but I believe it's called The Art of Loneliness. This was relayed to me from someone who had read the book. Apparently, she says that as children, there are parts of us that we learn are accepted and that get praised. And, in our family ecosystems that, okay, this is who we want you to be. This is what we want from you. But then there's the rest of us that doesn't fit neatly in. Maybe, a kid who has temper tantrums, maybe a kid who demonstrates homosexual tendencies in a household that doesn't allow for that. And then these parts get forced to hide in that family ecosystem. And in my particular case, that's where, like this sexual interest, in a household that was afraid of sexuality. I wasn't allowed to watch MTV or rated PG-13 movies. I went to Catholic school and it was sinful. And what ends up happening when you bury this, in my particular story, is I created a secret self, which felt really lonely, right? This is where Teal Swan's book comes in. Like the art of loneliness is when we are children, we stuff away these parts of ourselves that we don't feel will be welcomed in the world. And because no one ever gets to see them, we feel deeply, deeply alone, even as we become adults, even as, famous people are standing on stages adored by millions. When that part of you is never acknowledged or recognized, and you're the only one who holds that and then holds shame around it, it's the loneliest fucking feeling on the planet. And I had that, as someone who was carrying that sexually addictive part of myself around. And it became not only lonely, but exhausting to keep that away. And whenever someone tried to get close to me, I kept the wall up and I never felt like anyone knew me. And I felt resentful, even to the closest people in my life that you don't know me. And I think that's why we ask this big question, is how big is that gap? Because no one would have ever known from my what I put out publicly, that this was going on in my secret life, this addictive life. And therefore I felt alone, isolated, and resentful.
And I know that's a question that you've asked before, Dominic, and we could probably put an addendum onto the second question here is, how well do the people closest to you actually know you?
Right on.
If that's the barometer. And so we gave an antidote, right, in question 1, which was around intentionality. How did you deal with this? How did you start to break free of that shame and that secret life and start to see that alignment of one Dominic?
Mine was forced, right? I got discovered betraying the woman I loved in my relationship about 9 years ago, whatever, however long that was now. So I was forced to deal with it. That's one way. Like the secret self can come crashing down, right? Someone's going to discover it. You're going to betray a partner, whether it's, it doesn't have to be a betrayal because you cheated on them. It could just be an emotional betrayal. You kept something from them. There's another way of doing it. And I'm going to reference one of our listeners. We've been talking about this public, private, and secret self for a while now. About a year ago, one of our listeners came to me and he's prominent in his country in terms of a government official. He heard this about the public, private, and secret self. And he was so moved as a man in his early 40s that he told me, he's like, Dominic, I finally decided to share a lifelong secret that I kept from everybody. I'm gay. He's like, I'm gay. And for 40 years, I never let my family know. I never let my closest friends know, but I've known for decades and I've finally chosen to come out. He's like, our conversations, Bri, were the ones that catalyzed him to do that. And he said, I moved it from a secret to a private self. I had discernment over who I chose to tell. The whole world doesn't know. Like the people who I serve in my constituency don't know yet, in terms of like the people who vote for him and everything like that. But he was able to bring it step by step at his pace in a way that allowed him to feel safe. And he does have hopes one day to be able to bring it out, to a larger scale. So I would say for anyone who's listening, whatever that secret thing is that you're carrying, start to really get clear on the costs. How intimacy is kept at a distance, the fear of being discovered, the resentment you have of no one actually knowing you, and the exhaustion of creating and maintaining these separate lives.
Yeah, good. A really good indicator here, Dom, is if sometimes I struggle between like, oh, is this something that is it secret or is it private? And the easiest way to determine this is, does it feel like it's getting bigger with time? Right? Like over time, does it start to get heavier and heavier and harder to carry and harder to carry? Because if so, then there's some energy like leaking there. If not, and you're like, nope, I feel pretty good, and I really don't think about it all that often, it's probably really well suited for the private space.
Love that. So to ask the question again, on a scale of 1 to 10, how big is the gap between your public self and your secret self? How big is the gap between your public and secret self? 1 being we're perfectly aligned, 10 being the gap is Grand Canyon size. Question number 3. You love this one. This is, I think, your favorite on the list, at least what you said in the pre-show, is how you're spending your time aligned with what values you hold most important. Is how you're spending your time aligned with the values you hold most important. And to provide some context for this, Peter Drucker, who is the personal development specialist, he says, you could tell me what you value and I might believe you, but show me your calendar and your bank statement and I'll show you what you really value, right? And I know you have something to say about like, show me what you actually did over the course of the day and time track, and I'll tell you what you really value. I might also add, show me what you're looking at on your social media and how much time you're consuming and what you're consuming. I'll also show you what you really value. Some of the things that we hear about all the time, Bri, is, like some of the men in our community say, yeah, I really want to be productive and get the most important things done. But here's what they're really doing. They immediately check their cell phone upon waking up. They spend hours buried in emails, consume hours of media, and then go to sleep with the cell phone in their hands. Which means what they're really conditioned for is the short-term dopamine hits and responding to what's urgent over what's important. One more example of this is, hey, I say I really value working in a career that fulfills me, but what they're doing instead right now is working a job that they don't love, but it's familiar and it makes good money and is comfortable. So what they're really valuing right now is safety, stability, familiarity, and avoiding the pain of change. We can keep going through this. So what you say you value, but what you're actually doing when those are two totally different things, you have to look at what you really value. And it's sometimes these things of, I just want safety. I just want comfort. I just want to not rock the boat, which is really where you're calibrated right now.
And this can be really painful to go through and actually take a look at. So this is probably the question that I see people ask, and then they're like, I'm good.
Yeah.
I don't need to do this. When I was working at Accenture, we did job design, and we were trying to figure out what are the activities that a person needs to do in order to get this job done well. And so we would sit next to them. We call these time studies. We would sit next to them and we would write down at some sort of increment, every minute, every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes. What are they doing? What are they doing? Email.
They must have loved having you there.
Right. Could you imagine?
Oh my God.
It's literally like the awful angel on your shoulder the entire time. But then we literally did an audit. And then we had the audit afterwards. We categorized the activities. We're like, well, you say that your job is really important from a strategic standpoint and making decisions for the company, but actually you weren't making any decisions or providing strategic direction 99% of the time because you were doing emails, you were in meetings, you were doing all these other things, right? That weren't really those. And so that was the reality check of like, okay, what does this job actually have to be? What do those activities need to be in order to like get the job done well? And we could look at this really similarly. I know for me, it was just getting real with what I actually valued before I could change it, what I say I valued. So what I say I value is I value freedom. I value being able to make decisions on my own. And in reality, when I look at some of my activities when it comes to work, what I value was not losing clients. What I value was not getting things wrong.
Yeah.
And I could spend an inordinate amount of time on getting things right, even if it didn't move the needle on freedom.
Yeah, we just need to be honest with ourselves about this, right? And, one of the pushbacks I'll typically get when I talk about this conversation around what you really value is, no, I know what I value, but I just don't know how to get there. I actually believe it's not about the how, because if you value something and you want something enough, you build that burning desire, you will find a way. You will find a way. Like if you actually want something, I want to start my business. It's the most important thing in my life, but I'm working in a 9 to 5 and I have, responsibilities to provide a paycheck for home. If you really want to start that business, you will find a way. It's not the how. The how is the easiest thing to figure out. It's the internal conditioning that's the hardest thing to overcome. And that's why you hear, all day long, men who are saying, there's nothing more important than my family. I do this all for my family. But then I look and they're spending 7 days a week, 12 hours a day working, and their family has no idea who dad is anymore. No, like what you really value is being seen as the hardest worker, or being the guy who's committed to the company, or the guy who's, next on the list to be promoted, or the guy who runs his business. So let's just be honest about that. And once you start from there, then it's like, okay, no, I truly do want to be the father, or I do want to be the man who values his family. I don't like that I've become this guy. I do realize that the pull is strong over here, and it's going to be painful when the company calls me and asks me to cancel another vacation, to actually say no and put up. I'm going to, though, deal with that. That's the big shift, is building the burning desire around what you value.
And that can be scary, right? Doing that the first time.
It's supposed to be.
If it's not, there's probably not a lot of change happening.
Yeah. I
like this one, Dominic. So we're saying, like, what do we actually value? And I've heard it talked about as a commitment. And like, I may say that I want to weigh a lean 199 pounds. But what I'm committed to is a slightly flabbier 210. Like, that's what I'm committed, because that's what I actually weigh. And that's why looking at some of these things like money, like weight, and allowing ourselves to say, you know what I'm committed to? A slightly flabby 210. That's what I'm committed to right now.
Just be honest about it.
Okay, that's it. And now we can make a plan to go forward, because I agree with you that getting the mental conditioning right to move towards what we actually want is most of the battle. And it's also really easy to forget. It's easy for me to go throughout the day and forget that I want to be a lean 199 when, you know what? Is a 210 flabby that bad? Could be better, but it's not that bad. It's easy to forget.
Right on. So on a scale of 1 to 10, is how you're spending your time aligned with the values you hold most important? 1 being nope, 10 being bullseye. What is your score? Question number 4. Is your inner critic preventing you from going after what you really want in life? Is your inner critic preventing you from going after what you really want in life? Now, Brian, I'm not saying you're a crazy person, but you have a voice in your head that's telling you what to do. And that little voice is the inner critic that's constantly saying, hey, sleep when you're dead. Get up and do another thing, right? Or this guy's doing it better than you are. Someone's making more money than you are. Like, look at this person on social media, how more successful they are than you. Get to work. Julia Cameron, who's an amazing author of the book, The Artist's Way, The Spiritual Path to Higher Creativity, she's actually taken her inner critic and personified it. So the inner critic becomes less scary. Her inner critic, she has a name for him. His name is Nigel. And he's a gay British interior designer who's just constantly disappointed by everything that she does, right? And so no matter what she does, he's got like a snarky Simon Cowell kind of comment about what it is. But she's befriended and personified the inner critic so that Nigel can no longer keep her on the sidelines of her life. I think you and I both know, though, what it's like to not go after the woman we want, not to take the stage, not to speak out against injustice, not to make the bold move at work, because there's that inner critic kind of saying, yeah, but what if this goes wrong? Or what if you post it and no one comments? Or what if you say something and you get condemned? And then you just stay on that sideline, and you watch life pass you by. What's coming up for you, man, as you hear this inner critic?
That the sideline feels so safe. It feels so safe because you're not going to get criticized, right? Nobody's going to do anything. And there's been times of my life where I've reached and I'm not having any impact. God, I'm not even moving in a direction. Why don't I just do these little things? It becomes this had moments of life feeling dull, of this idea of just getting by, or that's enough. Don't get too big, right? These are the voice that you mentioned in my head. It is loud and it is really, really clear. And oftentimes puts me on the sideline because it feels safer.
Yeah. And it's that illusion of safety, right? Because in the short term, It's safe from the criticism, the internal, the external criticism. In the long run, you start to feel that nagging sense of unfulfillment. I'm not fulfilling my potential. I'm leaving this talent on this time is slipping through my fingers. This is how this all these questions kind of tie together, right? And for me, I know that my inner critic is scarier than any criticism I could face externally, right? Because someone else's criticism hits once, their voice goes away. It's what happens in my inner world that can consume me for hours, weeks, months, years, like those stories in the head. If I don't understand that I'm the one that's in charge, not my inner critic. And the other part of this, man, is like we talk about this. We don't shut the inner critic up and we don't condemn the inner critic. We just look at it and just say, Nigel, there you are again. Like, do you have anything useful for me today? You know what I mean? Like, is there something in here that I can actually learn from? Otherwise, like, go grab some peppermint tea, go fix my shades, and then I'll get to you later.
Yeah, and there's a few things we can do with Nigel, right? And Nigel, I would classify Nigel as like a supervillain. As like that critic that's always there, right? And you can avoid Nigel sometimes, but he's always kind of there. And so there's a couple other tactics that we can use, right? Another one is we can convert Nigel. And we can say like, hey, listen, like, I get it. Like, you're there for a reason. You're telling me this stuff because you want me to be safe. Is that right? Is that right, Nigel? Do you want me to be safe? Cool. Well, I'm just letting you know, like, I am safe right now. Like, nothing bad's going to happen. Right. So there's a way to convert them or befriend them. There's a way to, of course, we could battle Nigel, and maybe that could even work for a little while. I've definitely gotten mad at my inner critic before. I had a real estate deal that went wrong. And I remember going for a run and just screaming and just like, F you. Yeah. Like, because he was telling me at that time, Nigel, my version of Nigel was telling me that I was dumb. I didn't know what I was doing. I was inexperienced. I didn't have the right thing. I was going down the wrong path in life. Like, my Nigel's an asshole. And like, I just got pissed and I was ready to battle Nigel on that day. And you know what? These different tactics that we have, we can use them multiple times in multiple ways, all with the same supervillain. And one may work in one context and not work in another. And that's okay, because this supervillain, Nigel, will come back and we can deal with it in different ways.
The thing that most guys don't even realize is that they're dealing with the inner critic all on their own. And they're typically battling the inner critic. And the inner critic has way too much real estate in the deals that they get, that they choose to engage in their lives. And so this question is really to start to understand how much of your inner critic is keeping you on the sideline. How much of that voice is the one that prevails? Like, is your inner critic the one that holds the gavel sitting at your CEO's boardroom table? If your inner critic if Nigel is banging the gavel on the most important decisions in your life, then your life is going to be lackluster. It's not going to be what you want it to be. So, to put a bow on this one, on a scale of 1 to 10, is your inner critic preventing you from going after what you really want in life? 1 being, not at all, Nigel and I are best buds, or 10, being like, Nigel has me on a leash. And I think, actually one of the things I would love to do, maybe like for our own, some other time, is I want to name my own inner critic. Like, I want to personify him in the same way Julia Cameron has, because just talking about him in this way takes a lot of the fear and the power with him.
I'm willing to bet you have more than one character.
Probably.
There's probably a couple. You can name them when you see him. Like, there you are.
You take on various forms, you shapeshifter. Rick.
That's right.
All right. 5th and final question. This is a big one for a lot of guys. Do you have untapped potential, but don't know how to get at it or even know where to begin? Right? Do you have this sense that you have untapped potential, but you don't know how to get at it, or you don't even know where to begin? This is where I like to channel Henry David Thoreau from the book Walden. He says, in the long run, you hit only what you aim at. Therefore, though should you fail immediately, you had better aim at something high. And there's really no worse feeling than this constipation of potential, right? Like this awful experience to know that you're underclubbing the game of life, to see your gifts sitting on the sidelines, to know you've never truly put yourself to the test, to never really go after what you're capable of. I think most guys know if you're really going after your life, really taking a big bite out of life, or if you're just settling. And that settling can feel comfortable for a time, but that's when you wake up at night on a Sunday, 3 a.m, trying to sleep, when that nagging feeling of what the hell am I doing all of this for starts to come back. And that usually means that there's some sort of potential that's sitting on the sideline that you've been drifting and haven't gone after.
I like this question because like what guy's going to say no? What guy's going to be like, nah, like I've tapped out. I've hit my potential. I mean, there's maybe some guys out there, right? But the reality is that we all have this. And this is called a great man within, right? And that's the aspiration that each of us are going towards. That's the point of doing this work. And so where I get held up sometimes on a question like this is, in general, this feels true. In specifics, I struggle.
Yep.
It's like, great. Like, well, then what potential is it? What do I want to do? And you mentioned before that these questions are threaded together, right? And I like to use some of these other questions as indicators for, well, what is that potential? And oftentimes it's the critic, right, that comes over and says, don't do that. Like, that's some fear kicking in. And I go, interesting. Like, this is an area that I know innately, maybe not in my head, but in my heart, that if I go in this direction, like, I'm going to have some success. I'm going to enjoy this process. And it's been those times when I've trusted that intuition, not logically, not putting it out on a spreadsheet and being like, this is what I'm good at. This is what I would put on a resume, right? It's when I felt that intuition and then moved towards it ever so slightly and looked for that a little bit of evidence that I've had the greatest successes in life and greatest moments in life.
That's a great point about the inner critic. The louder the inner critic gets, the bigger the signal is that there's something there where your potential really exists that your inner critic is afraid of. I've told this story before, back when I was still in the corporate space and I was thinking about, oh man, I'd love to become an entrepreneur. I'd love to start my own business. I'd love to help other people, other men find their purpose, their passion. And my whole body was lit up with electricity, right? Like I've never felt this before. Like there was this surge of energy, this bright light that kind of shone through me. And I was like, oh my God, like I would love to do that. Inner critic comes floating by and says, you could never make as much money as you're making now doing that. Bang. It was like a circuit breaker. All that electricity stopped. And I was just like, wow, yeah, you're right. That's too bad. And for 6 months, I didn't even give it another thought. 6 months of my life. And then another meditation session, that same feeling came back. I really like that desire. I really want to do this thing. Electricity comes back, inner critic. Nigel comes floating through again. And he's like, yeah, but you can never make as much money. And I stopped him. I'm like, who the fuck says? Thanks, Nigel. Go sit in the corner. And then I kept that electricity going and I felt the desire and the burn. I'm like, okay. And this goes back to like what I really valued then was that feeling. Like I have to pursue this feeling. No idea how to get there. None. No idea how I was going to like wean myself off the teat of like a really lucrative corporate career. No idea what my business was going to look like. No idea how I was going to tell my family about. None of the how. I just knew in that moment, I made that decision. Like this is where I'm going to go. And the inner critic is usually the loudest in the places where the most potential exists. And that's why we always talk about you have to be around other men who are striving for their fullest potential, because if you don't know where to go next or you don't know how to get at it, being around a bunch of other guys who are constantly asking these questions, who are constantly kicking up their fears, talking about their inner critics, you will learn very quickly because they're mirrors of you. You will learn very quickly, oh, this is where I have potential in the bedroom. This is where I have potential in my career. This is where I have potential in my money and savings. This is where I have potential in my physical well-being, mental well-being. And you're on your own. It's a freaking echo chamber. And Nigel is typically the loudest voice.
It's typically the loudest and often ferocious. And the key is we don't have to do that on our own. It feels, again, safer, but that's the lie.
That's the lie.
So get with a group of guys that you can voice this desire. I felt this desire to be an entrepreneur. I don't know how to do it. Nigel, the asshole on the corner over here, is telling me I'm not going to make enough money. That makes me feel like angry and sad. Okay, cool. We can deal with that. Right. And then you got 8, 9, 10, 800 other dudes at your back or other people at your back. And like Nigel can't stand up to that. There's no way.
That's the thing that most people don't understand is You versus Nigel wins a lot. Wins more than his unfair share. When you've got like a legion of brothers who've got your back, when Nigel's his loudest, you got guys who are even louder, who are not going to let you shrink, who are there to support you. So if you don't have those men in your life who are actively supporting you, who are actively going after their full potential themselves, then you're fighting, it's like, fighting that Ivan Drago, you're like that big dragon that's going to win more often than not.
So use our indicators, use our Nigels, use our shame and the things that we want to keep secret as indicators for places where we can find direction and create intentional space for ourselves to go do what we're supposed to do here on earth. Like there's one fundamental belief that I have is that we are here on earth to create.
Right on. Yeah.
That's it. Like I think that we are here to create. What that is completely up to us, but it sometimes can be really hard to find.
Very well said. And the last thing I'll say on this is don't feel the pressure to figure out like, what is my purpose? When we're talking about this question of potential, it doesn't mean you have to have your whole life figured out. It just means like, what's that next area that will allow you to feel like you're growing, feel like your power is becoming unleashed? It could be in mental health. It could be in your physical well-being. It could be in your romantic relationship. It could be at work. There's all of these numbers of areas that you can go and explore. So don't feel like you need to have your life purpose figured out with this question. You just want to have momentum in some area of your life where you feel like I'm really growing here.
I want to give one quick example, Dominic, of how we can use some of this stuff. That moment that I mentioned about 11, 12 years ago, I asked one of these questions of myself. And what I did is I found an area that I felt the most secrecy around. And at that moment, I had a similar Nigel to yours that was like, hey, like you have to stay in this job because that's how you're going to make money. And I realized that money was the issue. And so I asked myself the question, like, let's just say that I had 10 billion in the bank. What would I do next? And what I found in that moment is like, I didn't have any answers because my entire pursuit was to like go get that money and run the race and everything else. Right. And so by just asking that question, by putting that on the side, that fear on the side, that Nigel on the side, and then asking a different question illuminated for me some direction.
Right. Great. So there you go. All right. On a scale of 1 to 10, do you have untapped potential, but don't know how to get at it? 1 being, nope, I'm tapping all my potential right now. 10 being, I have no clue where to tap that potential. And yes, I believe I have more of it. All right. Hopefully these 5 questions delivered on the promise to be the jailbreak question, like we talked about at the very beginning. The prison of your mind that narrows your thinking into a repetitive, confined way of looking at your life. These questions were meant to help you break free from that jail cell, to look at your life in a bigger, more optimistic and, opportunistic way. We have 5 more of these questions that we've put into an article on thegreatmanwithin.com. So if you go to thegreatmanwithin.com, right there, front and center on the landing page, it says 10 questions every man must ask about his life. Go there, check those out. Also, this episode is one of 13 episodes that we're releasing in the final quarter of 2021 to help you envision the man that you want to become in 2022. Right? Every one of the episodes that we're releasing in this final quarter of 2021 is geared to help you think about the man you want to become in 2022. And we're also going to be inviting you to a series of free webinars, free opportunities to envision yourself in 2022. So get on the email list, which is at thegreatmanwithin.com. So you'll hear about that. You'll be invited to it. Come to the Facebook group, always linked in the show notes. We'll be announcing it there as well, if this conversation was valuable for you today.
And start asking questions.
The big ones. Here's your call to action. Go to the show notes. Click on the link that says 10 questions every man must ask about the quality of his life, and go read the rest of that article. The 5 questions that we had here today, if you found those to be of any value, the remaining 5 will be equally as valuable, if not more. Maybe there's a question that Brian, who picked the 5 of the 10, maybe there's a question in there that he didn't pick that speaks directly to your life situation. So go check out that article, read it for yourself, and also think about a man or multiple men in your life. If you run a men's group, these are 10 great questions to stimulate a conversation in your men's group. Find a man who could benefit from this article and send it to him.